that, so just let me know. But thanks for the chance to be here today. I find this audience fantastic. Is it all right if I out you a little bit, Mike? So as we were planning this event, Mike was saying, well, you know, this is going to be a good event, but the thing that we have that's impeding our efforts is there's not really a lot of enthusiasm this year. And I didn't know if I believed that or not. I certainly hoped it was wrong, but wasn't sure what we'd see today, but I think what we see today makes it very, very clear that we have exactly the level of enthusiasm that is warranted by the kind of decision that's facing our country this fall. It's a historic and crucial decision. I have the first time in a decade luxury of not being on a ballot this fall, and so I have the chance to work on campaigns of my friends and people running at the national level whose success is so important for our country's future. So I plan to be working extremely hard between now and November 8th on those efforts, but I also have the luxury of spending some time thinking about paths forward for the state of Illinois, and that's what you guys asked me to talk about today, and because I'm nothing if not obedient, I will. So let's start with a little bit of history. Think back to the olden days of 2013, and sorry. And in those days, I think a lot of us felt that Illinois was facing challenges. Biggest pension debt in the country, worst credit rating in the country, most consecutively incarcerated governors in the country. We had a series of problems that needed to be tackled. And I think most of us in this room probably felt that the Democratic majorities in Springfield and Governor Quinn, while not always perfect in all respects, were slowly and resolutely trying to chip away at those problems in ways that were constructive. But I also think the general public kind of felt like, meh, you're not doing enough fast enough, and the problems are still there, and we're open to something different. And because the general public felt that way, an opportunity was created for Governor Rauner, who ran a campaign that really tapped into that desire for something different and laid out 4 very concrete policy commitments that he made to the people of Illinois. And as you will all doubtless recall, those 4 commitments were: number 1, shake up Springfield; number 2, bring back Illinois; number 3, don't have a social agenda; and number 4, be married to a Democrat. And on that platform, he was elected in 2014, and I think that his ability to meet the commitment to be married to a Democrat has been admirable throughout his term in office, but some of the other items on his list required a bit more fleshing out after the election. So he set about trying to explain how he was going to shake up Springfield and bring back Illinois. So I didn't vote for him, but I imagine that the people who did, at least the people who don't always vote for Republicans but did, probably thought, hey, remember those record-breaking problems? Remember how we have the biggest pension debt and the worst credit rating and the most consecutively incarcerated governors in the country? Hey, those are record-breaking problems, so maybe you'll find some items in Illinois policy that are record-breaking, that are different from other states, because that's probably where the record-breaking problems came from. And then, like someone who, you know, has a bad day at work and then chooses to solve the problem by coming home and beating up their kids, he chose to pay no attention whatsoever to items that are exceptional about Illinois, but focus with a laser-like attention on what he calls his turnaround agenda, which is mostly fighting about unions. And we have gotten, as Democrats, very, very, very good at arguing with him about his turnaround agenda. And so I don't want to fall into that trap today. I just want to observe that whether you agree with him or disagree with us that are doing what he wants us to do that are failing, and there are states that are doing the opposite of what he wants us to do that are succeeding. Not all states, but some. So it's not like we're by ourselves on some island and the successful states are all doing something totally different. It's an ideological fight, it's a policy choice, and it works probably works for some states and not for others. And meanwhile, those record-setting problems, debt, credit rating, and corruption, haven't gone. I set about the task of thinking about what's our solution set? The first place I begin is, what's really different about Illinois in areas where our outcomes have been problematic? And it turns out that if you're looking for areas in Illinois policy that are about these core fiscal, where does the money come from and where does it go questions, that are truly different from other states, you don't have to look very far. So I want to start by talking about something that is pretty extraordinary that's in our Constitution. Our Constitution says that our income tax has to be flat. And because our Constitution has said that, we'll assume that, oh, that's like sort of the way constitutions are, that's a normal way of doing business, and anybody who wouldn't want a state constitution to look like that would probably be some kind of left-wing lunatic. So it's helpful to look around the country and see what states do it like we do. We have the next slide. Blue states do. So on the blue states list, you have Illinois, which broke the world record for length of time not having a budget last year. You have Pennsylvania silver medal for length of time not having a budget last year. You have Michigan, which has sort of become like a metaphor for fiscal decline. And then you have Massachusetts, which is a very lovely place. And so here we have a fact embedded in our Illinois governance that's only like 3 other states. The 46 other states, besides these 4, do something different. And of the 3 that are in our bucket with us, 2 of them have not seen a lot of success with this approach. And if you think that I'm somehow skewing this data, let's look at the next slide and see who does it which way on the national level. So the flat tax approach, championed by the 3 gentlemen you see on the left-hand side of the screen. Those are noted Republican presidential candidates and thoughtful, moderate solution seekers, Ben Carson, Ted Cruz, and Rand Paul. And on the other side of the screen, you see not only, of course, the future president Hillary Clinton, as well as her primary opponent Bernie Sanders, and I think maybe literally every single Democrat elected to either house of Congress, but you also see noted left-wing radicals like Chris Christie and Paul Ryan. You all know the Paul Ryan budget is a real left-wing thing. He proposes a progressive tax. We also have our friend Donald Trump and Jeb Bush, and you see more and more and more. So what we've seen is a consensus has emerged, or a near consensus on the federal level. A near consensus has emerged on the state level that when you're figuring out how to raise money through income tax, one useful tool to have is to say, let's ask how different classes of people are doing. Let's ask where the money is, and let's design an income tax code that reflects that reality, and it's been so important. In the time since Illinois created its flat tax pledge, let's look at how incomes have changed. So the red line on the, really, that's great. The red line on the bottom is the bottom 10 percentile, and you see that since 1967, the income.
Dan, can you take the mic off because you're covering your
Yep. The red line on the bottom is the bottom 10 percentile, and the green line is the median, the typical income of a typical household. And you'll see that both of those have increased a little bit, but really not very much. Not since 1996 or 86, but 7. The bulk of income growth has been at the 90th and 95th and even higher percentiles. That's the sectors of the economy where people are truly doing much, much better over the course of the last couple generations. And so lots of policymakers not only have looked at this and said, if we need to find money to fund government, the place to look for it is in the, I'm bad at colors, I don't know, teal and purple, blue and purple maybe, this would be a simple way to say it. Blue and purple lines, and not the kind of slightly unattractive light green, and the orange is red. And therefore, a number of people in the back look concerned. Am I getting the colors wrong? I don't know. Excellent, thank you. And this is not theoretical. This is the exact set of fights that happen in state capitals across the country. And many states have successfully school dollars that come from property taxes. We're now first in the country. And so if you want to live in a place that has well-funded schools, the only way to do it is by paying what most people who live in this part of the state recognize to be enormously high property taxes. Next slide. And that results unsurprisingly, here we're only third worst, we're that red bar, in what is among school funding systems in the country. So let's recapitulate. We have this weird income tax provision that makes it hard for us to raise revenue fairly using the income tax. As a result of that unfair tax policy, we have to backfill the lost money with a different unfair tax policy, which is very, very high property taxes. And then, because that's where the money goes to fund schools, we also have very, very inequitable school system. So there's a lot of different ways to think all those different components through, but the one thread that stands in common between them is every time, in different ways, that we're harming our best shot at economic opportunity for all. Oh, and by the way, economic opportunity for all is another way of saying participate in our economy, which then makes the economy grow. So we're making it hard for all of us while making it hardest for those of us who have the least. I'm going to say, oh, here we go. A bit of a change of topic, though secretly not. Here's a fun little experiment to run. If you live in this part of the state, you vote for me or against me, you do what you want to do, it's fine. You vote for Hillary Clinton and against Mike Pence, you vote for governor, you vote for state representatives, you vote for a county treasurer, you vote for some school board members. Any guess how many people in total in different offices, not counting judges, you're responsible for electing to different layers of government? Any guess? Someone just want to shout out a number? Someone say 8. I think I just named 8. Higher than 8, that's your first hint. Okay, I've heard so far 20, 24, and 60. No one's high enough yet.
80?
80. The answer is 81. Nicely done. Give Kate a round of applause, please. So the other thing is that this is not normal. Every state has a lot of functions that are carried out by local governments. That's important and good. But the question for local governments to actually get the best outcomes at the lowest cost. And what Illinois has chosen to do is to have more units of local government than any other state, by quite a wide margin, as you can see. We've got right around 7,000, and the next state is under 5,000. So the thing about having more units of local government than anybody else is a few things. Well, first of all, they're funded, for the most part, with property tax. So it's another little thumb on the scale in favor of having more of what we do in government be funded by property tax, and therefore raising property taxes yet more and relying less on fairer streams of revenue. Here's another thing it does, though. It also says, hey, Mark, when the county treasurer has trouble multiplying 12 by 1.5, tell him about that, because you've heard of her. You probably haven't heard of 7,000 different units of government, and you're probably not meticulously digging into what happens in 7,000 different units of government. And so you have these little fiefdoms that are operating away from the public eye. Many of them, I suspect most of them, are operated very, very well by honorable people who are volunteering their time to do a good job. But you don't need that many of them to be operated poorly by dishonorable people who are operating their time to benefit themselves and their friends, to find that the aggregate impact on the quality and cost of Illinois government is severely poor. What we do in Illinois is we create little fiefdoms, and every time you build a new fiefdom, you're building another opportunity for someone to cut a deal and perform a transaction. And I think that has a lot to do with what has created the record-breaking forms of corruption that we see in Illinois, though I had not really, prior to preparing this presentation, thought about the impacts on longevity of our citizens as well, since that seems to be a consequence of impending incarceration, we've learned from Mark. But this does bring us to the next slide. This slide is a different version of the same problem. You might ask, you hear about the pension debt problems, you read about. Well, the first question is, what's a pension system? And once you explain what that is, the second question is, where do you find one? And the answer is that in Illinois, you find a pension system in any one of 628 different places. 1,600. Florida has 425, and nobody else has even 200. So not only are we second in the country, but there's only 3 states in the country that aren't dramatically lower than us. So those aren't units of government, they're just pension systems, but there's 628 additional fiefdoms. 628 additional places where there's an accounting consultant, there's an investment consultant, there's a legal consultant, and there's typically at least a few $1,000,000 being invested by 5 people, again, most of whom are just volunteering their time and doing great work, but some of whom, God only knows. If we could go back to slide 3, just to wrap up, which is probably slide 4 in your numbering, since there's a cover slide.
It's possible.
If we can, it's fine. I'm confident about the memory of this audience. There's a few things before or after different. Before that too. There's a few things that I think we just need to be looking out for. We need to be looking out for these extreme factors in Illinois government. If we're 49th or 48th or 50th, we're great. Maybe it means we're terrible, but we better ask. And if it's related to some of the areas where our outcomes have been terrible, there's a good chance that it's for perfect. There's a good chance it's not for a great reason. So number 1, identify these places where we're just different than other states. And the truth we had is starting to become more and more and more out of reach for a larger and larger swath of families. And that's not about Illinois, and it's not about pension debt, it's not about locking up governors, but it's maybe the most important thing we're facing in this country. The governor's solutions to our problems look at this chart and say, look, dude, I don't know, maybe you like it, doesn't matter, because it's happening, it's reality, and either we join them or we're beaten by them. We have to double down on this reality and make it more true tomorrow, or else we will not be able to be competitive in the modern world. I think the glue that binds together the Democratic Party philosophy. The philosophy that says, throughout history, we do better when we're able to enact policies that lift everybody up. Throughout history, we do better when we have policies that create a strong middle class. This is not a coincidence. It's a result of public policy decisions that have been made throughout that time. And it's not inevitable. It can be reversed by reversing those public policy decisions. And the last thing that needs to be a piece of the democratic solutions for a state, for our local governments, and for our country is high-wage, high-skill economic policies that reverse this trend. That tell the person at the 10th percentile, the 20th percentile, and the 50th percentile, we're looking out for you. You have to do your part, and when you do your part, your quality of life will improve, your incomes will rise, and our country will prosper together because of that. That's what I think everyone in this room is here for. That's what I'm committed to. Thank you.
That can't be done until that goes back to that, or can the legislature change that?
So the 2 questions. First, can you have a copy? I can definitely email you the slides, but I would also say that there's more where this came from at roadbackillinois.com, which I violated Marketing 101 by not saying that, so I'll say it again now twice. Roadbackillinois.com is where I'm posting more and more of this. But I'll make sure that Mike and Dan have, well, they already have this, and they're certainly encouraged to email it to anybody who asks for it. So the question then is, to the extent that a lot of this goes back to the flat tax provision in the Constitution, what can be done about it? Do you have to just open up the whole Constitution? No, you do not. The legislature can put a referendum to amend the Constitution on the ballot with 3/5 votes in each house. And by the way, it goes straight from the General Assembly to the public, bypassing the governor, which is a useful thing to know about these days. The Senate has appeared to have the votes. We haven't actually taken a vote for tactical reasons, but the Senate has appeared to have the votes. The House has appeared to be literally just a tiny handful of votes short, 2, maybe 3, on a good day maybe 1, on a bad day maybe 4. That's why these November elections are so important. If you read some of the less enlightened newspaper articles about what's going on in Springfield, certainly not those by Mark, they'll say, well, the Democrats have a supermajority so they can pass anything they want to, and they're just not, and so why do we even like them anymore? In point of fact, the Democrats can't pass everything we want, because though we technically have just enough votes for a supermajority, we don't have enough unity to get that done, but a few more seats would, on issues like this, I think certainly make it possible.
I just happened to notice last night that Colorado has it's constitutionally required. Do you happen to know how many states have flat taxes?
Great question. The 4 states I mentioned have constitutionally required flat taxes, but other states could choose to have a flat tax. There are 4 more than 3. There used to be only 7, now there's 8 because North Carolina voted for a pretty conservative kind of supply side governor, and they decided to enact a tax cut for the wealthy that flattened out their tax code to try to spur economic growth. That's not my cup of tea, but I think that's democracy. They had an election process that resulted in that outcome. That's the opposite of what I personally would have run on. The legislature, which is speaking for the people in that case, had the option. That's what we need.
The last time for a more fair tax, I felt that one of the problems was it wasn't explained to the general public adequately that the higher percentage earners would only be taxed on a certain part of their income. And everybody panicked, and it just didn't have a chance. I think if it comes around again, there just has to be better education of the general public.
There's no question, and I do start with this explanation of how unusual we are for some elements on the right have been pretty successful in saying this is some kind of a wacky left-wing confiscatory tax plan. No, this is what almost everybody does, and therefore people should have some comfort that it can be done fairly and reasonably and sensibly. And as you say, the way you structure these tax codes in any government I've ever seen is a higher rate only applies to a certain income. So if you say, hey, there's a higher rate over $200,000, doesn't mean that if you earn $203,000, you pay that higher rate on all your income. It means you pay that higher rate on $3,000. One more.
Of the pension system, you had spoken a little bit about the pension system. Actually, the pension system, there's not enough money put into the pensions.
Well, that's certainly true. The number one cause of the pension almost ever actually put in. The pension system in Illinois that is well funded is the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund. And that's not a coincidence. It's well funded because the law says that the required amount of money will actually get put in. And there's a hammer that says if the government responsible chooses not to put in what they're supposed to, they get punished, and so they don't even try. So there's no question that that's the thing that needs to be fixed going forward if you want to have any prayer of getting out of this. I do think there are other things that can be done. I've been an advocate for voluntary buyouts, which I think would clearly be upheld by the courts. They're clearly constitutional, they're voluntary. I also have been, as you saw in this presentation, an advocate of merging these smaller pension funds. That wouldn't help the big pension funds, but it would help the smaller ones and save municipal governments over time pretty significant money. There's a lot that can be done that's consistent with both what the Supreme Court has ruled and with basic principles of fairness. And rather than relitigate the fight and pretend the Supreme Court didn't say what they said, I think we need to find solutions that actually would work, move the systems towards solvency, that would not be the subject of a lot of litigation.
Thank you.